The pit that is dug is very deep. It will be where the enemies are buried, not where Ethiopia disintegrates. We will bury this enemy with our blood and bones and make the glory of Ethiopia high again. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's words are very powerful, and they echo Ethiopia's fierce determination to stand united in the face of adversity. Welcome to another episode of the Serengeti Synergy Podcast, where we shed light on critical African issues that often go unnoticed. I am your host, Mithamo Kinya, and today we will do a deep dive into a conflict that deserves more attention than it received, the Ethiopian Tigrayan War. This conflict pitted the federal government against the Tigray People Liberation Front (TPLF) and has far-reaching implications not only on Ethiopia but for the broader region and the continent as a whole. Join me as we unveil the complexities and significance of this situation that has been pushed to the sidelines by global news. Why wasn't this war covered as widely as the Ukraine war? Why wasn't this war covered as widely as the Israel-Gaza war? Why do African matters, even the gravest conflicts, get little to no attention, sometimes even from Africans ourselves? We explore the history of Ethiopia-Tigrayan war, its causes, its casualties, and how it ties to another growing tension, Ethiopia and Egypt ongoing disputes, and the tensions between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Most importantly, we'll question how Africa as a continent responds to its own crisis, and where we must take charge of our own narrative before they escalate into disasters. In order for one to understand the Ethiopian Tigrayan War, we need to go back to Ethiopia's complex political history. Ethiopia, Africa's second populous nation after Nigeria, has always had ethnic tensions. Tigray is a region in the northern part of Ethiopia, which was once quite dominant in the Ethiopian politics, particularly during the Tigray People Liberation Front (TPLF) rule, which led Ethiopia for nearly 3 decades after toppling the communist Derg regime in 1991. But everything changed in 2018 when Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopia's prime minister, took office. His rise to power was quite celebrated. He introduced democratic reforms, freed political prisoners, even won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 for making peace with Eritrea. However, this vision of centralized governance clashed with the TPLF, which had retreated to Tigray at this particular point, but still had huge military power. Tensions exploded in November 2020, when Abiy accused the TPLF of attacking a federal military base. In response, Ethiopian forces, backed by Eritrea, launched a full-scale military campaign against Tigray. What followed was a brutal conflict that led to mass atrocities, famine, and one of Africa's worst humanitarian crises in recent history. This war also highlights a cycle of betrayal that has long plagued the Horn of Africa. In the past, the TPLF and Eritrea joined forces to overthrow the communist Derg regime. When the TPLF took power in Ethiopia, Eritrea's independence was facilitated. However, years later, as we will see, Eritrea turned against the TPLF, aligning itself with the Ethiopian government during the Tigray War. This shifting of alliances underscores the region's fragile and often opportunistic nature of political relationships. This war was just not another political dispute. It was just not another tribal dispute, but it was a humanitarian catastrophe. Reports emerged of war crimes, massacres, sexual violence, starvation as a weapon, and communication blackouts that prevented the rest of the world and the rest of the continent from knowing the full scale of the horror. The numbers are staggering. By the time a ceasefire was agreed upon in 2022, an estimated 600,000 people had died, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in the 21st century. Millions were displaced, and Tigray's entire infrastructure was devastated. According to UNOCHA in 2023, 2.1 million people were internally displaced, while the World Food Programme in 2024 reported that 91% of Tigrayans faced food insecurity. Amnesty International in 2023 highlighted systemic sexual violence as a weapon of war, further deepening the humanitarian crisis. Yet, despite the sheer scale and magnitude of this tragedy, global media was quite silent. Why? Let's do a comparison to Ukraine, where within days of Russia's invasion, every major network was reporting live. Aid in the millions of dollars was pouring in, sanctions were enforced, and discussions dominated the international summits. The same happened in the recent Israel-Gaza war, but for Ethiopia, barely a ripple. Even we as Africans didn't amplify this crisis enough. Why? Have we internalized the idea that African suffering is normal? Ethiopia is navigating a complex recovery from the Tigrayan war. Yet, new tensions are surfacing, particularly in its relationship with Egypt over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. This ambitious project, aimed at generating power for millions of Ethiopians, has become a source of conflict. When Ethiopia views the dam as crucial for its development, Egypt perceives it as a direct threat to its water supply, given that Egypt heavily relies on the Nile. Despite attempts at negotiation, the situation has deteriorated, with Egypt hinting at possible military action if Ethiopia exerts too much control over the river. In addition to this issue with Egypt, Ethiopia's relationship with Eritrea remains fraught. As the largest landlocked country by population, Ethiopia faces significant strategic challenges in securing access to the sea. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has prioritized negotiation with neighboring nations to secure port access, recognizing the importance of trade routes for economic growth and regional influence. Although Eritrea and Ethiopia were allies during the Tigray conflict, uncertainties about Eritrea's long-term intentions persist. A particularly controversial comment by Abiy Ahmed stating, if we wanted to invade Eritrea, we would do so within a week, has raised a lot of alarms about the potential hostilities between the two countries. This remark came in the wake of Ethiopia's failed attempt to negotiate port access with Djibouti, Eritrea, and Somalia. To promote cooperation, Abiy offered these nations shares in the GERD project in exchange to port access, but the rejection of his offer highlights a preference of maintaining sovereignty over their ports, rather than engaging in economic partnerships with Ethiopia. This refusal has deepened Ethiopia's strategic challenges and heightened regional tensions. Ethiopia's approach to GERD is indicative of mercantilist economic strategies, which emphasize the control of vital resources to strengthen national power and minimize foreign influence. By pursuing energy independence, Ethiopia aims to bolster its industrial capabilities and reduce dependency on external nations. And these tactics were used by European states during their mercantilistic eras. However, this approach risks escalating regional conflicts, especially if the resource control is deemed as a zero-sum game by the neighboring countries. Why do we often wait for crises to escalate before we take decisive action? The Ethiopian Tigrayan War stands as a stark example of how African nations and the African Union failed to intervene proactively, allowing a conflict to spiral into a humanitarian disaster. It is a troubling pattern that African conflicts are often dismissed as mere local issues until they escalate into global crisis. The world witnessed this tragic oversight during the Rwanda genocide in 1994, which had profound international implications. Similarly, ongoing struggles in the DRC and current turmoil in Sudan highlights the far-reaching consequence of inaction. Despite having an early warning system in place, the AU has struggled to effectively detect and prevent conflict before they erupt. The challenges it faces are complex and multifaceted, ranging from political hesitancy among member states, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and lack of swift decision-making mechanisms that hinder the AU's ability to respond promptly. Furthermore, limiting funding and competing national interests often stall efforts of rapid intervention, leaving a lot of African regions in jeopardy. The time has come for African nations to examine this pattern of behavior. We must stop waiting for external validation, and we have to acknowledge the urgency of our own conflicts. It's imperative that we take ownership of our responsibilities and act decisively to create a more stable future. Only by prioritizing our own issues and fostering cooperation can we hope to prevent future crises from escalating into disasters and resonate far beyond our borders. The constant eye of conflict, shifting alliances, and missed opportunities in Ethiopia highlight broader issues across Africa. The need for proactive, African-based and African-led solutions. If we want to break free from this cycle, we must demand that our stories be told. Not just when there is famine, not just when there is a coup, but consistently and with urgency that they deserve. The Ethiopian Tigrayan War, Ethiopia's strategic push for port access, and its escalating tensions with Egypt and Eritrea should be at the forefront of African and global discourse. These issues shape the future of the region, yet they remain sidelined. If African diplomacy fails to address the Ethiopian-Egypt and Ethiopia-Eritrea disputes in time, we may be staring at yet another crisis. One that could have been prevented with stronger regional cooperation, early warning mechanisms, and decisive leadership. The solution begins with awareness, but awareness alone is not enough. It must translate into action. It must translate into policies that prioritize long-term stability, into media narratives that uplift African perspectives, and into leadership that is not afraid to take bold, preventative measures. Thank you for tuning in to the Serengeti Synergy podcast. This conversation does not end here. Keep questioning, keep discussing, keep thinking, and most importantly, keep advocating for a stronger, more self-reliant Africa. If you found this discussion insightful, share it, talk about it, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and run Africa. Thank you.